So in this module, we are still going to be working with categorical data. More specifically, we're going to move from looking at one categorical variable to having two categorical variables. We're going to look at a motivating example to see why we would look at two categorical variables. So for this example, we would like to see how the president's approval rating looks among U.S. adults this past month. So we took a random sample of 50 adults from each of our 50 states, and we asked them to tell us two things. First, their feelings about the president, that is, whether they approved of him, disapproved, or were neutral, as well as if they had voted for Trump in the 2016 election or not. So let's first go through what those two variables are. We recorded their feelings about the president. And as we can see from the options of approve, disapprove, and neutral, this is going to be a categorical variable since you will fall into one of those three categories. Our other variable, the other thing they recorded about each of these people, was if they had voted for the president. So did they vote for Trump? So this is going to be a yes, no answer to the question. So this is also going to be a categorical variable. So we do have two categorical variables here. But the main goal was to look at the president's approval rating. So that's what we're going to look at in our pie chart below. So in this pie chart, we just looked at the approval, whether they approved, disapproved, or were neutral. So first, just a reminder about how we got this graph in StatCrunch. So this data set is in our NKU Shared 205 shared data set. One is this POTUS, one that we see here. So if I click on this, it'll just load it into StatCrunch for me. So in order to get that pie chart, I just did graph, pie chart, and I do have the actual data for each person. Clicked my POTUS opinion and clicked compute. So here you can see a little bit more closely the pie chart that we had. So of our people, 950 or 38% approved, 1,400 or 56% disapproved, and 150 or 6% were neutral. So that's all we're going to do in the space provided is interpret those numbers that I just went through. The only other thing I need to know is how many total people did I sample. There's two different ways I could get that here. I could add up the 950, the 1,400, and the 150 to get that 2,500. I can also see that in the problem since we took a random sample of 50 adults from each of the 50 states. So if I took 50 times 50, that gives me my 2,500 that I've also sampled here. So interpreting our pie chart, so of our 2,500 U.S. adults sampled, we found that 38%, or you could say 950 people, approve of the president. 56%, or 1,400 people, disapproved. And the rest, or 6%, which also could be labeled as 150 people, were neutral on the matter. So by just looking at that, I can see that more than a majority, or more than half, did disapprove of the president in the last month. However, that isn't quite everything. So what information was not being displayed by this graph? While there were two variables that we recorded, we did also take into account if they voted for the president. I mean, do I think that might actually make a difference? So the problem here is we have only addressed one of the variables. All we've looked at is the feelings about the president. We haven't taken into account if they voted for Trump. So then the second part of the question is here, do you think that that would make a difference? That is, you think that if you voted for Trump, you're going to have different feelings about the president. So let me phrase it that way. So do you think that having voted for Trump would have an impact on one's feelings about the president? So I do think that is probably going to have an impact. So let's look at things that way. So I know here on my screen it's a little bit harder to see these plots, so let's show how I actually created them. So what I want to do is create one plot for those that did not vote for Trump and another plot for those that did vote for Trump. How do I do that in StatCrunch? I'm going to go to the exact same place we just were, and I'm even going to click the president opinion that I want here as well. To create more than one plot, I'm just going to choose this group by, and I'm going to group by my other variable, which is whether they voted for Trump or not. To get my plots so I can look at them both at the same time, I just change this columns per page to 2 instead of leaving it as 1. So then when I hit compute, I get my 2 different graphs here. Now, just looking at the graphs real quickly, one can see there's a lot more red over here and more blue over here. Now let's look at what that actually means here and if that surprises us or not. So over here, the red represents those that disapproved of the president. And we're looking at those that did not vote for Trump. So would it surprise you that those that did not vote for Trump are very likely to disapprove of the president? Probably not too surprising. First over here, the blue represents those that did approve of the president, but now we're looking at those that did vote for Trump. So are you surprised that those that voted for Trump are more in favor of the president? Again, probably not too surprising. So all we're going to do next is take these 2 plots one at a time and interpret them. But one thing I'm missing, but we're going to make sure we also show here later as well, is I am working with my same data. So I need to figure out, well, how many people did not vote for Trump? So I'm going to take my 298 plus my 987 plus my 76, and that will give me 1,361. So I'm going to start interpreting this plot. So of the 1,361 U.S. adults sampled who did not vote for Trump, so now we're not looking at everybody, we're only looking at those that did not vote for Trump. All right, so we found that 21.9% approve of the president, 72.52% disapprove, and finally 5.58% were neutral. So again, that's just looking at those that did not vote for Trump. Now let's do the same thing looking at those that did vote for Trump. So now I'm going to be using these numbers over here instead. So I'm going to take my 652 plus the 413 plus the 74 and get 1,139 people that did vote for Trump. So then of the 1,139 U.S. adults sampled who did vote for Trump, so again, now we're only looking at those that did vote for Trump. In this group, we found that 57.24% approve of the president, 36.26% disapproved, and the rest, or 6.5%, were neutral. So just interpreting each pie chart separately there. Now what I want to make sure I show you is that I didn't change any of my data. That is, the same plot that I started with here is just taking that same data and breaking it up a different way. So first notice that we started with 2,500 total people. Well, 1,361 plus 1,139 is still my 2,500 people. We've just now separated them into two groups, those that did not vote for Trump and those that did vote for Trump. So still those same 2,500 people. What I also saw in my initial graph is that 950 people approved of the president. I can see that in my data here as well. So if I take my 298 plus my 652, I get 950 total approvals that I had. Same thing here then with those that disapproved. There was a total of 1,400 people that disapproved. So I can see from my graph that if I take my 987 plus my 413, I still get a total of 1,400 disapprovals. And then finally for neutral, I had 76 plus 74, or 150 total people that were neutral. So it is the exact same data, just broken up a slightly different way. So when I look at these plots, this is what it means to look at two categorical variables. So what type of question would I look for two categorical variables? So here's my question that uses both variables. Do you think that voting for Trump, our first variable, has an impact on the person's current approval for the president? So that's my question, right? I'm using both variables. Did you vote for Trump? And do you approve of the president? Now, how do I go about actually answering this question? Well, what's great, we can start by just looking at that visually. So if we looked at these graphs, my first question, do the graphs appear to be very different? Does it look like this amount of red is different? The amount of blue is different? Do the pictures look different? Well, I would say definitely those graphs do appear to be different. They are quite different. And if I start looking at some numbers and comparing them, if I look at those that approve, right, if I compare those two numbers, the two values that we got, so for those that did not vote for Trump, we had 21.9%. And for those that did vote for Trump, we had 57.24% approve. If I look at that difference, that's about a 35.3% difference here. So that's a pretty substantial difference in those sizes of those pieces of the pie. And if I look at those that disapprove, if I compare those numbers, we had 72.52% for those that did not vote for Trump, that disapproved, and we had 36.26% for those that did vote for Trump. And that's about a 36% difference. So those are some pretty substantial differences. Notice I'm not really saying anything about the neutral. If I look at those first just graphically, they don't look very different. Number-wise, 5.5% compared to 6.5%, those don't appear to be all that different to me. So this is the goal. This is the motivating example here. But the big deal is right now, this was still just a sample. Could I say that this is true for all U.S. adults? That those that voted for him are more likely to approve of him, and those that didn't vote for him are more likely to disapprove of him. Do I think that's going to be true for all adults? That's why we're going to want to do a hypothesis test at some point. But a little bit more information we have to do before we dive into the hypothesis test. So in the next video, we'll start talking about summarizing this data in an easy-to-use format.